U.S. history in the course review, and we're going to be looking at a review covering the entire book. I'm going to break it down into different sections, and there's a little picture of the Statue of Liberty. And let's go to our next slide, which is a table of contents, and you'll be able to see the different eras that we'll be looking at, the different areas we'll be covering. Today, we're just going to be looking at this first one right here, Early American Period, which begins on page 4, which is not really a big deal to you. And we'll go through that today and take about, hopefully, 10-12 minutes to do it. And I'll do each one of these in a separate video. And they, of course, are for your usage, but we'll start with this one, and this will be the only one that we'll do it in this particular video. So let us begin. Here is our first slide in that early American period, and there we go, the early American period. This is an extremely important period of time, though on the test there will not be a large number of questions on the STAR test and the course test, but it's extremely important to you to understand how our government works. What is the makeup of our government? How did it get started? What are the intentions of our founding fathers? And that's why this is included. Okay, so let's go through this. Our very first thing here, we have the Declaration of Independence, signed July 4, 1776, is the day that we recognize as the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, one of the great thinkers of his and any other time. There's a lot in it, and we've covered it in the early part of the school year back in August, I guess it was, maybe September, whenever it was. And we went over it in a lot of depth and detail. We probably will do so. You probably need to do so again. But there are a number of different parts to it. And we're not going to break down each and every part of it now, but we will go back and review it. And you need to go back and review it because it is important to you. One of the things that it did do was list a set of grievances that they had, the colonials had against the king. That was one part. The final part was a demand of independence, or actually a statement, we are free. And along the way, we had a statement, a political, philosophical statement on what is America, what do we believe. Essentially put, we, Americans, believe that God created man and gave man rights. Man then creates government to safeguard those rights. If and when government ceases to do so in a manner that mankind thinks is appropriate, then man, again, man referring to Americans, we have the right to overthrow, replace that government. In fact, we have more than a right, we have a duty to do so, and put in place a government that safeguards those rights that were given to us by God. We should not do so for anything, as the Declaration calls, a light and transient cause, but we should do so when there has been, again, as the Declaration states, a long train of abuses and usurpations. Those two statements are extremely important, extremely powerful. All right, let's move forward, and I realize there's so much more that we should and we could cover, but we don't have the time in this. This is just a very short little introduction, a short review. The Constitution, 1787, replaced the Articles of Confederation. Our first government, it was weak, and it was not up to the task. It created 3 branches of government. They are the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. All 3 have separate but equal powers. Talk about that in just a moment or two. Each one is clearly defined in the Constitution. Now, the constitutional principles, they are listed right there. And I'm going to go through each one a little bit, not a lot of depth and detail, but a little bit. Let us start with republicanism. And essentially, the definition is that we, United States, Americans, created a republican form of government, a republican being small letter R. A capital R Republican would refer to someone who believes in or is a member of the Republican Party. That's not what we're talking about. In this case, a Republican form of government is a democratic government of representatives elected by the people. You could call it a representative democracy. So we are not a democracy, unless you call us a representative democracy. We are a republican, a republic. We have a Republican form of government. We are a republic. And again, that's a democratic government with a representative body, a body of representatives that were elected by the people. Our second term here, popular sovereignty. This is the term that has been used often in and around the Civil War to refer to the ability to vote on whether or not slavery will be allowed. Okay? That's not exactly what we're referring to here. It's been used that way mostly, and most of us think of popular sovereignty, we think of slavery and voting for or against slavery. But essentially, the people are sovereign. Under popular sovereignty, the people are sovereign. They, sovereign referring to supreme power. They, the people, hold supreme power. The powers of the government, therefore, come from the consent of the governed. And that's in the Declaration. We, the people, okay? It's not we, the government, we, the states, we, the bankers, we, the Republican Party, we, the Democrat Party. It's we, the people. And that's what starts the Constitution. And we, the people, have sovereign, supreme power. And therefore, the government derives its power from the consent of the governed. All right, our third one, federalism. The authors of the U.S. Constitution, again, primarily written by Madison. There were a number of people who contributed. Pretty much everybody at the Constitution Convention contributed a little bit, but he is the primary author of it. Anyway, the Constitution created a federal republic. Okay, what this basically means is that the powers of the government were divided. The powers of the federal government are divided. Let me restate that. The powers of the national government, because we often use federal and national and state, and these terms often are interchangeable. The powers of the government are going to be divided between the national government, which is now located in Washington, D.C., and the states. So we have 50 states. They, along with the national government, which is located in Washington, D.C., work together to solve issues, to solve problems of the country. That's federalism. It is a marriage between the state governments and the national government to solve problems. For example, state governments will have power over local matters such as education, leash laws, those types of things. And the federal government will continue to do what it's done, is to do as set forth in the Constitution, declare war, print money, those types of things. So federalism is a relationship, a marriage between the state governments and the national government in D.C. Our next one, checks and balances. And this was designed to prevent either one or any of the three branches from becoming too powerful. Our founding fathers worried that one branch would become too powerful, therefore sort of create a tyranny of that branch. And because of that fear, there would be checks on the other two branches' power. Okay? So, checks and balances to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. The Constitution was set up in such a way that each branch had a way to stop or check the other branch's powers. The Supreme Court turned out to be a huge concern of the Founding Fathers because they were concerned that the court may become somewhat tyrannical. But it also turned out that the Supreme Court was especially important because it made sure that the other two branches respected the Constitution. Essentially, the Supreme Court, is able to determine whether laws are constitutional. So, there is a great deal of concern by our Founding Fathers that one of the three branches will become too powerful and become a tyranny. So a system of checks and balances was created so that no one branch becomes more powerful than the other two. Takes us to our next one, which goes hand in hand with it, the separation of powers. The authors of the United States Constitution, again, primarily Madison, but there were 50-something other people who had a little bit of a hand in it, decided to divide the powers of the federal government among the three branches. So you have the legislative branch, which is the Congress. Essentially, it makes laws. You have the president, the executive branch, and it is his job, so far it will be her one day, I'm sure, but so far it's been his job to ensure that those laws are carried out. And then you have the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, and of course all the lesser courts that go into the judicial branch. It is their job to interpret the law. So there is a system of a separation of powers that Congress has the power, for example, to declare war. But the president is the commander-in-chief. So the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances go hand in hand to ensure that what do we get? Oh, we get our next one, limited government. This is pretty simple. The powers of the federal government, the powers of the government in Washington, D.C. Now, again, it wasn't originally Washington, D.C. It didn't become Washington, D.C. until the 1800s. But, okay, the power of the federal government were limited to those specifically stated in the Constitution. So our founding fathers wanted a government in which there was a way that our government would not grow too big, too powerful. Keep in mind, we had just fought a war a decade or so before to escape what we believed was a tyrant and a tyrannical government. And so they wanted to limit the power of government, which is one of the reasons why they came up with federalism, republicanism, proper sovereignty, separation of powers, limited government, all of it. Because they wanted to limit the power of government. Our last one, individual rights. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory. That there is a listing of, or that there are individual rights that we have, we, the people, have, that are protected or to be protected by the Constitution. Now, the bulk of these individual rights are going to be mentioned in the Bill of Rights. I want to get to that in a slide or two. The Ninth Amendment basically states that there may be other rights out there that are not listed here. So there might be others that might pop up from time to time as time changes, as the world changes. But essentially, the idea was that these individual rights were those rights that are guaranteed to us, or given to us by God, and then we create government to ensure that they are not taken from us. Let's go to our next one, the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and here is a quick look at them, and we're going to go through this kind of quickly, do it in about 2 or 3 minutes. And there they are, the first 10. Number 1, freedoms of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of speech, religion, press, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Essentially, you are free. Again, there are some limitations, as we saw very recently, or we've seen in the Schenck case during the First World War. There are some limits on freedom of speech. You can't get up in a crowded theater and yell fire. And there's some other limits to these things that are really more or best suited to be discussed at an individual level, one-on-one, okay, or look at them as they pop up. But you're guaranteed, generally speaking, freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, petition. Number 2, the right to keep and bear arms. I mean, this is pretty simple. Guns. It doesn't state, now again, this is just a paraphrase. These are not the exact wordings of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights. It states that you have the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't say to go hunting or to protect yourself or to show off for your girlfriend. You have the right to keep and bear arms. Of all the amendments, this is the one over the course of the last 50 or so years that has been abused the most. And when I mean abused, I mean that has been ignored. Number 3, this is the one that's never popped up. The quartering of soldiers in homes during peacetime, this has never been a problem. Either because it's not a problem or because it's in the Constitution. I don't know which, more than likely just because it never is necessary. Number 4, protects people against unreasonable searches and seizures. And, of course, this is something I'm sure you've seen if you watch any of the police shows that are on TV, Law & Order, SVU. I mean, there's any number of different shows out there that go into searches and seizures or unlawful searches and seizures. And, again, there are any number of different variations of this. You know, you're driving down the road, you get pulled over a cop, he wants to search your car, can he, on and on and on. Those are things that are probably best discussed as they pop up. Not that I cannot go into every scenario that you, the student, can come up with. And to be perfectly honest, the courts are kind of confused on this as well. There's been a lot of different opinions. But you have a right against unreasonable searches and seizures, and I think the key word there is unreasonable. Now, what is unreasonable to you may not be unreasonable to a judge. We will leave it at that. Number 5, people cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Now, it goes into much more than that. This is the most lengthy of the amendments, and it covers a huge amount of territory. You also have the right against self-incrimination. You cannot be forced to testify against yourself. But the property one is extremely important. There is a provision within the Fifth Amendment that states that your property cannot be taken for government uses unless you are justly compensated. Again, this is just a very brief look at it. These are things that need to be studied and discussed in much greater depth. We don't have time at this moment. Number 6, the right to a speedy trial and to attorney. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, won't be provided for you. We've all heard that. We've all seen that on TV dozens, hundreds of times. Well, this is where it comes. This is where it comes from. Number 7, the right to a trial by jury in most cases. Now, if you're accused of stealing, $5 worth of candy at HEB, I don't think you really need a jury trial. You're accused of murder. You're accused of kidnapping. Yeah, you need a trial by a jury of your peers. Number 8, protects against cruel and unusual punishment and against excessive fines and bail. For example, you are arrested for a murder. Well, they want to set bail at $1 million. Well, that's not necessarily excessive because you are being accused of taking someone's life. If you are arrested for speeding, or if you're arrested because you had a minor fender bender and you didn't have a license on you, well, they're not going to set a bail at $1 million. That's excessive. Cruel and unusual punishment, well, again, what is that? Many people believe that the death penalty is cruel and unusual. The Supreme Court has ruled numerous times that it is not. In fact, we have changed the way which we execute those who we believe are worthy of execution to probably the most humane ever through lethal injection. Number 9, the rights of the people. Essentially, as I mentioned earlier, this basically states that there might be other rights that are not mentioned here, and those will be determined as we go. And the last one, 10th Amendment, rights granted to the states. Essentially, it states any powers not given, any rights not given to the federal government nor denied the states belong to the states. Essentially, if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, it belongs to the states. And over the course of the last year or so, and again, this is December of 2015 at the moment, there have been several cases dealing with gay marriage, with abortion, neither of which is mentioned in the Constitution. So if you are a believer, a strict interpreter of the Constitution, then those issues and others are not mentioned in the Constitution belong to the states. Okay, let's move forward. Alexis de Tocqueville, he wrote a book after touring America for a couple of years. He wrote a book called Democracy in America. And in this book, he pointed out several characteristics that he believes that American democracy shows that no other place does. All right, we have 5 of those characteristics that are mentioned here. Now, let me walk through each and every one of them very quickly. Liberty, right there, first one. Liberty refers to protection. Tocqueville refers to this term liberty as meaning protection against a tyrannical government. The great danger from a democratic government, a Republican form of government, was the tyranny of the majority. I mean, in a democratic representative government like we have, a representative democracy like we have, it takes a majority. We have a presidential election coming up in November of 16, about 12 months from now. And generally speaking, 95+% of the time, whoever gets the most votes wins. It doesn't happen all the time, but most of the time. And so what liberty refers to is not only the rule of the majority, but a protection of the rights of the minority. Tocqueville wrote that most important of all American customs, the most important of all American customs and manners was a devotion to the spirit of liberty. And he also wrote that religious faith, again, America is founded on Judeo-Christian principles, that religious faith helped strengthen the belief in that individual liberty. Okay, let's move on. Egalitarianism, this refers to equality. And this goes back to Europe and the fact that Europeans were built around, or European society was built around a system of hereditary distinctions. You know, if your father was royalty, well, you're royalty. If your father was a stable hand, well, you become a stable hand. So if your father was rich and powerful, you become rich and powerful. If your father was poor, you're going to be poor. There was that caste system, that division, societal division. And egalitarianism basically does away with that. And that's what he saw here in America. Individualism. In American society, the American government does not directly, I'll rephrase that, does not tell individuals what to do. They do not direct individual activity, as you often saw in Europe. So essentially, individualism, we get to choose what we want to be. We get to choose within our system, away from those levels, societal levels you find in English. You have the right, you have the ability to move up and down the ladder, the social ladder. You're born poor here in America, you don't have to remain poor. You're born rich, doesn't guarantee you're going to remain rich. Populism. Again, we talked about popular sovereignty already. Populism refers to the participation of the common people in the political life. Again, we're talking about people voting, people expressing their opinions. Now, today, of course, that's through social media, letter writing, YouTube video, I mean, whatever the case may be today. In the period of time we're talking about then, we're talking mostly about maybe editorials in the local paper or voting itself. So populism refers to the participation of the common man, the common people, as Tocqueville calls them, the common people, participating in government any way they can, at the very least, voting. And of course, laissez-faire is a term that we have covered before. It is a government economic policy of hands-off. The government does not interfere with the economy, or interferes fairly little. Pluribus unum, out of many comes one. Okay? And of course, that is on our money. Now, some of the individuals who were very important in the founding of America and the winning of the American Revolution, the writing and signing of the Declaration of the Constitution are listed here as well. Go through them very quickly. Jonathan Trumbull, the only colonial governor to side with the colonists. John Peter Muhlenberg, a Protestant minister who recruited soldiers and eventually rose to the rank of general. Charles Carroll helped finance the Revolution. He was pretty wealthy. And also signed, of course, the Declaration of Independence. John Hancock, President of the Second Continental Congress. That's the one that wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he was a signer of the Declaration as well. He's also quite wealthy. Helped finance some of the early years of the war. Benjamin Rush, father of American medicine. Also a signer of the Declaration. John Witherspoon signed the Declaration and was the president of New Jersey College, which eventually becomes Princeton. John Jay helped write the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were those documents that helped convince the American public to ratify the Constitution. All right. The Reconstruction era. This should be our last slide. The Reconstruction era. In the early 19th century, the three main sections of the country, the North, South, and the West, were affected differently by the rise of industry. These differences eventually led to a great conflict, which we call the Civil War, and it took place between 1861 and 1865. Essentially, you had the North and the South. The North, which is depicted by that right there. The South, which is depicted by that right there. The North was heavily industrialized, more populated, better educated, people lived longer. The South was rural, had smaller population, and its people didn't live as long, the life expectancy was shorter, infant mortality rate was higher, on and on and on and on. A lot of things. Whatever was good about the North was probably bad about the South. Okay? The primary difference was, get rid of all of that, was that the North was essentially free of slavery and the South depended upon slavery in order to make money. The war was extremely devastating, well over 1 million casualties, devastated the economy of the South, but eventually the North, the anti-slave North, won, and the South was reintegrated into the Union. As a result of the war, there were 3 amendments that were passed. 13th Amendment banned slavery in the United States and any of its territories. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all persons born in the United States and guarantees equal protection under the law. It also guarantees due process. That's not mentioned here, but it also guarantees due process. And the 14th Amendment was aimed at the former slaves. This took place after the war ended. They all 3 were passed after the war ended. So if you're born in the United States, again, this is aimed primarily at the slaves, you are now a U.S. citizen. And the 15th Amendment ensured that all citizens had the right to vote, regardless of race or color. Again, this is aimed at the former slaves. All right. We have one question, and this will be our last slide in this one. Under the Constitution, the government may not make private property, may not take private property unless, A, the land requires extensive restoration, B, the government determines that the land is critical to developers' profits, C, the landowner refuses to build a home on the land, or D, the government pays the owner fair compensation for the land. Well, of course, this is the 5th Amendment, and it is letter D. People must be justly compensated for the land if the government wishes to take it. And there have been several examples, and I've probably given you a few already. Okay, we're going to end this. This is the end of our first look at the end of course, the first end of course review guide. So,